to this latest edition of the All in Schools podcast. This week, I'm very pleased to be joined by David Bier. David, hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Colin. All good. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I love what's behind you there. What's on the wall?
Oh, well, so this room uh, doubles as a study. So when I'm working from home, and also I practice guitar in here when I'm making a horrific noise. So the door shuts. And what's behind me is, apart from one of the guitars in this room, some of my heroes. So I've got Kurt Cobain, I've got Paul Weller, I've got The Edge, and Bernard Butler from Suede. So that dates me quite well as well.
But music isn't how you earn your crust, is it?
No, probably best. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to afford any of the guitars. No, I work in banking, and I'm actually in, I guess you could call it my second career, because I've worked in banking pretty much all my career, and for the first couple of decades, 3 decades, I was in IT, but now I'm in banking. We think about the back office being the sort of support functions at a high level, and front office being customer facing, revenue generating activities. And now these days I find myself in the front office. So I now sell foreign exchange solutions, I guess, and I'm customer facing and revenue generating.
Did you set out to build a career in IT, or is that something you fell into?
Yeah, I did go after a career in IT. I studied IT for my degree. I always had interest in computers and bits of coding and playing games. I'd always had IT in my life, and it just sort of seemed quite natural to do a degree in IT. And once you've got a degree in IT, then obviously you go after IT jobs. So yeah, I did pursue that and had a lot of fun doing that for quite a while. Now, I hadn't intended to make a change, but opportunity came up, and with someone that I'd worked for, and it was knew me from stuff that I'd done for him, and I took the opportunity to make a pivot.
I'm assuming we're talking early 90s that you were studying IT. How popular was that as a degree at the time?
It was pretty popular. There were various flavors. So when I studied, I had the option of doing a BSc, a Bachelor of Science, or a BA, Bachelor of Arts, and the BSc was very coding development focused, which is not the thing that I did. So I did the BA, which was more um, around the marketing, the management of IT, and that suited me because I did a bit of coding. But it wasn't a passion of mine. Maybe I'd have, if I'd been another more successful route or more financially lucrative route, as lots of Googlers will probably tell you. But I was always interested in making IT work, and so that was the degree that I did, and those were the roles that I got off the back of it. So I was never a developer. Primarily, I was a business analyst or a project manager or a hybrid of the two.
Is that what a lot of the people graduating with the BA in IT ended up doing, or did they go in various different directions?
I think they probably went in various different directions. I know there were a number of my cohort that went off to do business analysis type roles, and then have gone into, I mean, I guess thinking about a career, the standard sort of career path, you might, as you get more senior, you get into management, and I know a number of them have done that kind of thing, and some of them have completely dropped out. I know one's a physio, and they decided that the corporate life in the end wasn't for them. But I think a lot of people did go into project type roles. I think some of them did probably, but I think some of them did go into development. But I think mostly that, we were trained and had an interest in IT projects, managing them, running them, and a lot of people got those roles out the gate in various kinds of corporations.
How job ready did you feel at the end of your degree to go out and use these tools that you've been given at university?
It wasn't a hard transition for me. It was a very practical course in that sense. So we'd done a number of projects as part of the degree. We'd done a project for a mock customer, which was a UK building society, and as part of the degree and organised by the university. And so when it actually came to it, I interviewed tolerably well, and didn't feel it was a tough transition. I felt the degree prepared us quite well. But I think at that time, it felt like a relatively sort of static work environment where education and the workplace were relatively well aligned. There was a relatively small amount of change compared to what the environment is now. Whereas, the jobs that I guess people now who would be graduating and working, the jobs that their kids will do maybe don't exist, and so it's very difficult to think about doing a degree that will lead straight into a job. But when I was graduating in the workplace that I moved into, it was, for a lot of people, it was a relatively smooth transition. So I don't remember finding that wrench at all.
How did you make the decision to move from one place to another? Because I see you occupied a variety of roles over the decade after graduation.
I had a focus on doing a project, and I had quite a short attention span, but I had a low tolerance for doing stuff that didn't immediately interest me. So I did tend to move around quite a bit in my early career, because I was always looking for something more interesting to do. And also, frankly, I remember working with people in my early career that had been in, whichever organization it was, for a long time. And I found that strange. I didn't understand, in the way that I might do now, why somebody would stay with an organization for decades. I thought that was kind of perverse. And I thought, surely when you're young, relatively inexperienced, and relatively cheap, take the opportunity to move around, seek out lots of different projects, get lots of different experience, and then maybe settle. So I was quite driven to look for new things and look for new opportunities, and relatively impatient. And I guess the upside of that approach was, at least the way I did it, every time I moved, I negotiated a high salary. So my salary jumped every time I moved, and that seemed like quite a good combination of things. So more varied experience and a number of increments in salary just seemed like a good way of doing it for me. And so I did that, as you say, for quite a few years. And then at one point I became a contractor, and that was just the norm. And that felt quite natural to me because of the way that I'd sort of comported myself when I was a perm. And obviously there were people that I was working with that stuck around and had been around for longer. And it seemed like, that wasn't quite the path for me at that point.
Do you think that somebody nowadays, could they get away with that now? Or do you think that's part of a bygone era, moving as you did, not exactly on a whim, but moving as the mood took you?
I think there are a couple of paths, and there are pros and cons, right? So by doing what I did, moving around a lot, uh, it gave me a few upsides, as I've mentioned, but the downside was that I've now sort of find myself at a relatively junior grade, whereas if I'd stuck around in one job or with one organisation, I might have sought promotion and advanced myself that way. There is certainly still the ability to contract, and without getting into 0 hours contracts or anything like that. I think people do still value flexibility, and so I think it's still completely valid to take that approach. And I would say it's probably less advantageous to be a perm and move often. It's probably more effective to be a contractor if that's the way that you're going to work, and that's completely viable. But it will only suit you if you're happy and comfortable with a certain amount of uncertainty, because if you're a contractor, you're probably on a 6 month contract or whatever the period of time is. You're going to have to constantly renew. You might not get renewed. You can be let go quite easily. So if you're comfortable with that degree of uncertainty, then it could be great, because you do get that variety of experience working with different people as well as on different projects. But if you have the mindset of wanting to sort of stay and build deep expertise in one organisation, and potentially benefit from, if you're working for a bigger organisation, as I do now, a bank, the global mobility within different businesses, different jobs, different functions, and as well as the scope to get promoted, then I think either is really viable. It depends on the role and the industry that you're in, and every individual's mindset. And you might not know that up front, right? I think there's a lot to be said for taking opportunity when it presents itself.
I think a lot of people of our age looked on slightly jealously at people with IT expertise because of the .com boom in the 90s. How did that affect your career?
It hammered it. To be honest, I was working for a global bank at the time, which has since been consumed by another bank. But I'd been working in a traditional corporate environment. as you know, as I did after a big project, I started looking around, got a bit bored, and went to work for a startup, not a technology startup, but a financial services startup under the umbrella of another larger organisation. But we were very much a small team in a startup environment, and that just um, that just failed basically. I mean, we built the thing that we were building. It was successful. Like we successfully built it. It was a contract for difference trading platform. But the parent organization of the startup team that we were in had a change of leadership and decided that the ROI time was too long for them. So, you know, you had a new CEO coming in, looking at the project sponsored by the previous CEO and seeing that this was going to take 3-4 years to turn cash flow positive, and decided he didn't want to sponsor that. He didn't want to suffer that loss in his tenure, you know, new broom sweeping clean, all the rest of it. So he shuttered it. So, and that happened just when the bubble burst effectively. So there was not a lot of, or there was a lot less opportunity to find a new role. So it was quite difficult actually. But given my age, and I felt I didn't have any dependents, I had bought a flat a little bit previously, 18 months or so, and that had that quite a bit of value. So we were able to sell that, and my girlfriend had just moved in, so we sold the flat and we went travelling, and we sort of, I guess, waited it out effectively, and came back when the market was more buoyant. And a year and a half or so later, came back into actually quite a buoyant market and was able to get a job quite quickly, and actually buy a small house with the proceeds of selling the flat. So we were lucky that we had that flexibility.
Lemonade,
Certainly.
lemonade from lemons.
Exactly. Yes.
Excellent. Another thing I noticed on your CV, and that is Royal Bank of Scotland and ABN AMRO.
Yes. So I was working. I was working at RBS when they acquired ABN AMRO, and that was one of the biggest projects that I worked on, because merging two corporations in there, and as I say, I was in IT at that time, and you know, merging the technology stacks is a huge undertaking, and you know, a lot of these things aren't successful because of, or at least they're problematic, and remain problematic for years for a lot of organisations that acquire other corporations. So that was a massive undertaking. It was quite a bit fun, but you know, there's also the cultural side of it as well. So you've got, effectively, in these situations, you've often got two people going for every job, or something like that. There are a lot of moving pieces in a project like that, but it was a lot of fun. It was the first time I'd been involved in that kind of merger, and it was one of the biggest. It was, you know, it made headlines, well, for years actually. I think a lot of people will still remember those times with sort of fondness, and it will probably have been a fairly pivotal time in many people's careers, I'd have thought, because where there's change, there's opportunity. So although some people would have lost out to their equivalents from the other organisation in securing, you know, the job that they both did, some people would have done very well. A lot of people, you know, who make their bones, as it were, delivering that scale of change, that makes you very visible, and a lot of people got advanced through that project. So it was kind of fun to be on the inside of something that was generating so many headlines as well.
I had a lot of clients at that time in Brazil at Banco Real was acquired by ABN AMRO, and ABN AMRO was acquired by Santander in South America. So that part of the ABN AMRO breakup, I saw from their perspective. And it's interesting what you're saying about the culture. So you've got literally the merging of the IT side and that back end. But it was interesting to look at the cultural stress between the new bank and the acquired bank.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic, because everybody in both organisations that are merging, or you know, on the acquisition, then they're simultaneously having to keep their focus on what the combined organisation wants them to do, but they're also looking very closely at the impact to them directly, and those things can sometimes clash, right? And sometimes what the organization wants in order to become more efficient is to get rid of you. So, and that's always the fear, right? Am I going to be a casualty of this, or am I going to benefit from it? And in the meantime, there's still a job to do. You're still being paid, and there are still expectations, and the work has to go on. Customers still have to be served, etc., etc. So there's a weird kind of tension in wanting to do your work, contribute to the project, and also keeping an eye over your shoulder in case someone's actually coming. You think someone's coming for your job. For me, I think the best way to protect against that is to do it as well as possible. You always want to, and this is, I think this is a thing that has come up again in my career, and why I've been able to make the change now that I have for in recent years from IT to the front office. The opportunity came up from good delivery that impressed somebody else that later was in a position to offer me that pivot. And I think that's the same thing when you're in these sort of periods of instability. I think focus on being excellent at your job and visible at being excellent at your job gives you opportunity and can be protective of you, I think.
Difficult to talk about Royal Bank of Scotland without mentioning the global financial crisis, which was hot on the heels of the merger, was it not?
Yes, it was. And yeah, I mean, OBS, well known for being very acquisitive. And, I think that the narrative now is that they flew a bit too close to the sun and acquired, too many businesses, and ultimately the sort of construct couldn't scale. And because it's hard to take on an additional company that you acquire, they had so many of these things in sequence that it I think presented too much of a stress, and there was a lot of financial leverage and all that kind of stuff as well. So they didn't weather the financial crash as well as other less fragile organisations, I would say. So yes, so I lost my job, was made redundant during that period, and that's happened to me twice. Been made redundant. That's an interesting experience.
Well, roll with the punches, presumably, right?
Well, yeah. So I guess one time, as I said, we ended up going travelling because I just couldn't find anything, and we were lucky that we had the flexibility to do that. When I got laid off from RBS, I was actually thinking about making a complete career change. At the time, I was doing part-time photography. I was doing kids portraiture and looking to build that into a business, and I had some success in that. And so I thought, well, when I got laid off from RBS, right, this is the time to make that change, and I'll go and do that full time, which didn't happen. I was growing the business, but not growing it enough. And then I got the offer of a contract in banking and IT, and that just seemed like a good way to get some level of stability back, because we had by that point we had our second kid on the way, imminently due. In fact, the agent who signed me up for the contract ended up having to come all the way up on the tube to the end of the central line. Like the normal thing would be that you go into their office and sign the contract, or I guess now it would be that probably be done online. But rather than that, because I was literally waiting for my wife to go into hospital and have the kid, he ended up coming up to me up at the end of the central line, and we met in a cafe, and I signed the contract. Signed the contract there. So the timing was quite good, because we had that, we had a child on the way. The contract came up. It was like, yes, I need to do this. I need to know that I've got certainty of income.
Did this new role, did that represent a significant change, or was that essentially more of the same?
It was essentially more of the same, in as much as it was business analysis, which is something I've been doing for a while. It was working in FX, which I'd done before, foreign exchange, which is what I'm still working in now. But what was new was that it was contracting. It was never. It was overtly at the beginning a contract role. It had, I think it probably would have been a 6-month contract, which ended up renewing several times, and I was there for a few years in the bank that I was contracting with. So it was new in as much as it wasn't going to be a perm role where I might get bored after a year, 18 months, 2 years, and look for another perm role, and the cycle would repeat. This was contracting from the start.
So at that point, you got that ants in your pants out of your system. You were there to settle.
I think the ants and the pants were built in, right? Because if you're a contractor, no, I mean, it's actually it's not the expectation that you become perm, and that does happen. But in general, if you're there as a contractor and the organisation want a contractor, then it's a time limited role. They want you there for a project, which is going to be, well, as long as they've got it funded for, whether it's 6 months a year, or and it might roll. So they might take them for 6 months, and it's a 2 year project, and at the end of the 2 years, they don't renew you anymore. Um, so it was nice to know that I wasn't going to have to play that game. Like I'd effectively been acting as a contractor for the early part of my career, in that I'd moved on that same sort of frequency, but this wasn't the expectation up front. So it was quite nice to know that I wasn't going to have an uncomfortable conversation with the boss, because it would end at the end of the contract, or when there were no more renewals, or when funding was lost. So it was quite refreshing to know that, okay, this is the expectation, which is cool, because I wasn't thinking at that point, I'll leave and go and try photography. I decided that wasn't going to happen, but I thought, well, let's just, actually give contracting a go. The, the other um, the other reason that people contract is because you get a good day rate. Um, although then this is the balance that I talked about. Although I hadn't got tenure for several years in an organisation and been promoted a couple of times and grown my income that way, um, I was getting paid the equivalent of someone who was more senior than I would have been if I'd been a perm. So I got the flexibility without any expectation that I wouldn't be able to move on if I wanted to, getting well paid, learning good stuff, and also you are expected as a contractor to begin delivering very, very quickly, which I like, because I like doing what I do and getting in there and showing value, and that just appeals to me. I like ticking the box and say, yeah, I've done this, and I can look back on what I've done that day, that week, that month, and I can see concrete stuff that I've delivered. So it was a change in the context in which I was doing something I was actually quite familiar with.
I've spoken to a couple of teachers in these podcasts, and occasionally teachers will do something here in Australia. We call it CRT, casual relief teaching, where it's a bit like what you're talking about. You get a better daily rate, hourly rate. I mean, you get better pay, but you don't have that connection, a contract with the school. So there are benefits and there are drawbacks. Are you treated differently as a contractor than, or do you find that you mentioned previously about this idea of organization culture? I'm just thinking in terms of the relationship with the people that you work with within the organization, how you relate to one another, how you report, that sort of thing.
It is very variable. There are still, and I know I'll be talking about banks, right? Because banking is what I know. There are banks that generally prefer not to use contractors where possible. I mean, they always will, because it gives them flexibility. They don't want the fixed cost of having a permanent employee on their, and that fixed outgoing. So they want to be able to get rid of someone when the job is done. But even so, there are banks that prefer not to do that, and banks that are actually quite comfortable, and they embrace the flexibility. And even within an individual bank, there'll be businesses and teams that have got a varying appetite for contractors. But I think if you're in a team, and certainly from my first contract, there were three or four of us, two or three of us that were contracting, and we were working in about the same number of people that were perm. And it was absolutely fine. We were just part of the team. Obviously, we all fully understood that some of us were there as perm, and were sort of thinking about their grades and their end of year appraisals and all that sort of stuff, as well as doing the job. And there were some of us that were just there to do the job and wouldn't be there once the job was finished. But day to day, absolutely fine. I mean, and that's what it was like in that bank. I've heard stories about some places where contractors are treated very, very differently. So, for instance, there's a French bank I'm thinking of, where in the staff restaurant, if you're a permanent employee, and being a French bank, they take food and meal times quite seriously. And if you're a permanent employee, the staff canteen had a little subsidy, and they were, that was seen as a big perk, that you could have really quite good food for not a huge amount of money. But if you're a contractor, then there was no discount. And so sometimes those working patterns are very different for perms versus contractors. In some places, you wouldn't know, and then they're treated very very much equivalent. And that's mostly been my experience. So I really enjoyed being a contractor. I didn't, in terms of the day to day, the interactions with my manager, with my colleagues, it was it was absolutely fine. I didn't, and you were just aware that the things happened that didn't involve you. So there'll be an annual review process, there'll be an annual bonus cycle, all that kind of stuff, and you were just kind of excluded from that. Fine, but in terms of actual delivery, day to day stuff, then you were just part of the team.
How did your role evolve within this organization? Was it providing you with the sorts of new challenges that clearly early in your career you would go from place to place?
Yeah. So there was a bit of drama, not in terms of slotted straight in. Was enjoying the role. The project was good. I was delivering, what they were looking for, but quite quickly. So I think I was on for a 6-month contract, which is pretty standard. I mean, I have a couple of times I've been given a year's contract, but generally they tend to be 6 months. Within the first period, so I think around 4 months in or something like that, the project that I was on had its funding taken away, and so they were they were going to let me go. But something else came up within the same bag with another team in another business that were actually looking for somebody with the expertise that I had. So I'd written project specifications that I then went into another team and actually implemented. And I'd become my own customer, or my own sponsor. So it was quite fun, like reading these specs that I now had to implement that I'd written for somebody else that was previously in my new seat. It was kind of weird. So I guess I've benefited from the size of the organisation and the fact that there were a number of opportunities available and could move in quite quickly, which is something that you might expect if you're a perm as well, right? People do go to certainly larger organisations because of the flexibility, because they can move roles, they can move locations. And so again, as a contractor, I benefited from that. The organisation benefited because if they hadn't had that available, then it got rid of the cost and got rid of me. But it worked out really well. So I did a number of projects across a few areas, still with a foreign exchange kind of lens, and then something else came up, and I moved to another bank. But I've really, that was my first contract experience, and I was with that bank for, well, you probably know better than I do looking at my LinkedIn, but it was certainly 2 to 3 years.
Something I talk to people about is this idea of how you grow your career, how you advance yourself. And do you find that throughout your career you've had this awareness of self-promoting or finding a way of polishing your CV and making connections and speaking to the right people, or is this something that's been you haven't really had at front of mind?
It's changed. It's changed over the years. I would characterise my career as having really two chapters. Firstly, when I was in IT, and whether I was perm or whether I was contracting, I was acting like a contractor. I was thinking on a very project-based transactional level. So I worked on a project and then I did another project, and whether that was in the same organisation or whether it was in a new one, I was just thinking about what I was doing now and then thinking about the next thing. I wasn't thinking about staying somewhere, building my brand and building my visibility. I was just thinking about delivery, delivery, delivery. Now that I'm in the front office, and I was originally a contractor, but I was working, working in the business area. I've stayed in that business area, and I'm now perm again. Basically, the first time in my career, I'm now thinking about building my visibility, promotion, all that kind of career building stuff. So my focus has shifted into that mindset from something that was a bit more transactional in the first chapter of my career. And also because I'm getting to the end of my career, but I'm certainly in the last decade, that plays into it too. But I'm certainly now find myself for the first time thinking about advancement, and doing the job well, but doing it in a way that's visible, and thinking about how to grow a brand internally as well. So yeah, I'm conscious of that sort of thinking now more than I ever was before.
So you think that's probably got more to do with your stage of career rather than the changes in the workplace in general?
Yes. When I think about people that I work with now who are senior and have been with the bank that I now work for a while, I think that they probably took a more traditional approach to their career about being somewhere and advancing yourself in that organisation. And that was always open to me. But I decided on acting and then being a contractor and just thinking about individual projects and individual deliveries. So I don't think the workplace has changed. I think my approach to it has changed, and also the fact that I do feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to move into the front office. It's hard to, for people that aren't familiar with the banking world, I think it's hard to overstate. There is a massive difference, at least I always perceived a massive difference between being in the front office as a very high status thing and something that I never thought I'd have the opportunity to do, because that's where the money is made, right? And that's, that's where all the glam is and all the customer events and frankly where the money is earned as well, versus the back office, which is where a lot of work is done out of sight relatively. I mean, it's really necessary work and it can be really interesting, but people have whole careers. I certainly did, but it wasn't as exciting to me. So the fact that I've now managed to get myself into the front office, I want to stick at it. I want to excel in this environment that I've fortunately managed to get myself into.
Knowing what you know now about the realities of the front office as that you're talking about, would you have modified your approach to your career early on?
Somewhat, somewhat. I was never, because I was never concerned with building a brand and advancement. I was always just thinking about delivery on the project that I was working on, and that's still necessary now. And there's always necessary, but actually, there are other things that I now have to think about if I want to be promoted, for instance. I think I finally found somewhere that I'm I am grateful to be in. I'm an environment that I'm grateful to be in. Uh, I can see that people around me are hugely talented people, hugely ambitious people. It feels like a more demanding environment than I've been in the earlier phase of my career, and it's something that I want to do to prove to myself that I can excel in this environment as much as I did in previous sort of back office roles. It's difficult to say because the reason I enjoy the environment that I'm in now so much is because I can contrast it against where I've been before. Not to say that I didn't enjoy what I did. I didn't have respect for the people I work with. I was really impressed by the people I work for. But something now about being in such a demanding sort of high status environment um, makes me really want to knuckle down and prove to those around me that I can I can play here as well. But there are certain things that I think are always necessary in a career. The reason I've got into the environment where I am in the job that I really like is because I was able to make those opportunities happen by doing a good job and delivering where I was. And I think that's always necessary. Depending on what you're working towards, the things that you focus on differ, but there are certain core aspects that any employer is looking for, right? And obviously, I'm not talking about being a founder, or I'm thinking about being an employee or working for a big organization. Always looking for excellence in delivery. They're looking for a certain amount of commitment and not being a clock watcher and all that kind of stuff. They're looking for an attitude, and that's always the case. And if you can make those things happen, then opportunities will present themselves, and what you do with them is up to you. So what I'm doing with, looking to do with the opportunity that I've now been given is different than I was, different than I was looking to achieve when I was being very transactional. I was just looking for, well, if I do well in this project, then I'll get the opportunity to do another project and another gig and another contract, or go and get another job with a slightly higher salary. Now I'm thinking about, right, I will actually want to bed in here, develop really deep expertise in this organization in the way that I can help shape the evolution of this business, these customer relationships where I am, and demonstrate that and stay here and advance myself in place. Yeah, I think the what you do with what you're looking to achieve changes depending on what you're looking for, but what you have to do in order to make those opportunities happen is probably quite static.
You mentioned you have children earlier on. Do they want to follow you into the IT path, or they're going to do something completely different?
No, they're not interested in that at all. In fact, well, certainly I'm not in the IT path at all anymore, so they don't understand what I do. The fact that I've got something to do with foreign exchange is all they know, and they're not interested in that whatsoever. And it's not. I think it's probably quite common. One of my previous bosses was he worked in FX, and his family had no idea what he did. So he also had a home office, and they bought him a bureau de change sign to hang up because they knew it was something to do with foreign exchange. So I don't think that's uncommon that, when you work in a corporate job, what you actually do can be so niche when you get into the details that it's kind of impenetrable and incomprehensible to friends and family. So unless you're something very, very well understood, doctor, lawyer, something that has probably had films and media made about it, but very few people, I think, are making films about someone working in foreign exchange solutions. So no, they're not looking to follow what I do because they don't know what I do. Other than they know where I work, they know that I work in the big tower, and they know roughly the, very, very high level details. But no, they're not looking to follow my path. So my eldest son is just done his A levels, and he's hoping to go and do geography. So he's hoping that he can find work in that sector. The youngest, who's just about to go into his GCSE years, hasn't got a clue what he wants to do. But I very much doubt he wants to work in FX.
David, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Brian. Nice to meet you.